Miriam's piece I have one is short hair and wearing a wedding dress with earphones, and I'm sitting in a wheelchair. And I have a guide dog who will fall asleep soon. It's a pleasure to be with you this week. I have heard much about the Institute, and I'm grateful to experience it myself now, meeting people whose work I have admired. With my CP speech, my script is available online. I will also ask my dear friend and colleague Emma to read for me when my body tires. My doctoral work came out of the experience of having trouble finding places for Crip bodies for my Crip body to serve in congregational ministry. The church did not know quite what to do with my body, a body that had been celebrated and recognized at denominational and global ecumenical levels, but was not experienced in the same way by congregations. While theologies of disabilities are growing and changing, much of what I encountered during my MDiv was not told from the perspective of Crip and disabled leadership. When I opened up the world of Crip and disability studies, it felt like I found a piece of myself, my community. And so I began using an interdisciplinary method in my work, bringing incarnational theology and ecclesial theology into conversation with Crip and disability studies to conduct an incarnational Crip practice and theology of ministry. It is the functions of ordained ministry, word, sacraments, and pastoral care, functions that occur within the body of a clergy person and the bodies of the Christ community. Here is on Bonhoeffer's Incarnational Ecclesiology that my dissertation sought to clip. Regarding the sacraments of baptism and communion, the contributions of Crip liturgical time and space in which the theology and practice of these words shape by Crip bodies. Crip care reps and access intimacy helped me imagine an alternative model of pastoral care that shows how we can encounter Christ as we recognize each other's needs and appropriately care for each other. This morning, though, I want to for together how we might imagine a Crip performance of the word. First, I briefly demonstrate the ableism embedded in the pulpit and in preaching texts and congregations' expectations. In my dissertation, I also mingle together Crip testimony and preaching as testimony. You'll have to wait and hope and pray I can get my book done at some point. And then I will bring the concept of Crip performance, including the significance of the chair, to imagine a Crip collaborative preaching performance. Can you read 2 paragraphs? Yeah.
To construct a Crip incarnational theology and practice of ministry, we must first marvel at and celebrate the good news of Christ's incarnation. The joy of the incarnation honors the created and creative beauty of bodies around the world and throughout time and in the present moment. The good news of this holy and holy mystery is that God desires to be in relationship with all that creation is and is becoming, including the complicated bodies of humanity. Christ existing in a human body signifies not only his presence in the world, but also affirms that humanity exists in God. Theologians lament how Jesus' body has been made to be more palpable, especially in Western churches. While the church worships a messy human baby and the Christ who leaks water and blood on the cross, the minimalization of these realities impacts how people experience their own bodies and relate to bodies in the Christ community. Black theologians, Palestinian theologians, queer, feminist, and Crip theologians help bring people to the reality of the lynched Christ, Christ under the rubble, the by Christ, the disabled God, to show the significance of Christ's oppressed body in solidarity with the bodies that continue to be oppressed. We encounter the gift and grace of the incarnation through the preaching of the word. Feminist homiletician Amy McCalkin argues that people preach in and through, with and as bodies. She writes, quote, within every preaching moment, particular conceptions of the preacher, what it means to preach, and what kind of authority a preacher has, and the expectations around a preaching body are all at work, end quote.
The first time I preached, I stood in the pulpit. I stood because that's the only way I saw other people preach. Standing in the pulpit, delivering God's elevated word to God's people. I knew it would take more energy, but I underestimated the cost of my body standing to speak. When I'm sitting down, my voice tires from speaking, from taking the time and energy to enunciate so that I may be understood. Standing up to preach, even with the pulpit to grasp onto, drained my energy faster. My pace slowed dramatically. My words started slowing together even more. My breathing became noticeably heavier. Finally reaching the amen, my Crip body collapsed into the wooden chair beside the pulpit. I resigned myself to leading the remainder of the service sitting down. At the time, I felt defeated by the pulpit. I did not recognize the ableist ideals upheld by the physical toucher or by my performance that Sunday. As the story shows, puppets reinforce the norm of compulsory able-bodiedness that the church, its theology, and even preachers ourselves unconsciously hold for ordered ministry. Ways and fits in space, prophets increase the visibility of the preacher for the congregation and vice versa. In the time before modern sound system provided some amplification of sound. At the same time, a raised pulpit is a theological statement indicating the set apartness of the Word of God, and by extension, the person who holds the office of ministry, one with authority to preach. While the tradition of standing in the pulpit communicates a stable meaning and structure for the office of preacher, the lack of fit for disabled bodies poses, quote, the shape of the normative body for which the space was originally designed, and quote, as disabilities college of Receivers notes. Puppets can also disembody managers in them, abetting communities of faith who are uncomfortable with diverse bodies. As the preacher has a representational role of the people before God, the diversity of bodies cuts both ways. Identification and solidarity with the preacher by those who share their embodied identity on one hand, and discomfort on the part of those who feel embarrassed because they do not want that preacher's body to represent them. On the other hand, puppets hide what congregations may not want to look at. Pregnant bodies, Crip bodies, queer and transgender bodies. These opaque semi-closures render occupants invisible below the waist, but even the obscuring that puppets offer is not perfect. Black, Asian, indigenous faces and hair are visible above the confines of the pulpit, and diverse voices sound. The ways puppets are constructed may be interpreted as obscuring bodies or the physical and emphasizing the head and the face or the rational in the sermon. Bodies should not be a distraction to the function of ministry. In this way of thinking, a brief word on the sounds desire to come from the pulpit, or even in congregations that have imagined the preaching space more accessibly. Expectation of the preacher's voice also can be filled with ableism, as demonstrated by preachers by textbooks focusing on the clarity and proper discipline of one's voice. Quote, the preacher's most powerful tool, end quote. The expectation is that the preacher's voice conveys clarity and a confidence that communicates a certain kind of authority, an eloquent voice that commands attention. While theologically, the authority of the preacher arises from their listening for God to grappling with the text, ableist privilege is often projected onto the preacher's voice. One paragraph.
Ableist theologies and practices of preaching restrict whose bodies can proclaim God's message of liberation and solidarity, ultimately restricting theologies of Christ's incarnation and the Christ community. The site from which the good news of the incarnation should be announced is the very site that obstructs the proclamation of the incarnate word by Crip preachers. As was evident in my story and her story fragment, attempting to fit Crip bodies into spaces that are uncomfortable, energy draining, and even dangerous, or restrictions on whose bodies preach the word, comes at the expense of both the encounter with the word and the preacher's bodies.
My work imagines instead how preaching is incarnational, a function that is fulfilled through the very bodies which shape how preaching happens. And so how might or do bodies shape that act of preaching? To help imagine and draw on the concept of good performance developed in part by Patrick Cooper's and inviting the chair, an idea put forward by Rosemary Garland Thompson. Episcopal priest and feminist theologian Alain Bozarth writes that preaching is the act of God's unveiling. Quote, it's a visible moment of incarnation when word is revealed in its full power, in its own reality, in its own time, end quote. Because the sermon is more than an intellectual act, the bodies of clergy serve as instruments and even messages, whether or not the preacher are aware of what their bodies discourse. It is not only the body's preacher's body that is active in the event, but the bodies of the whole Christ community. They may make notes, close their eyes, lower their heads to facilitate listening. They may wiggle in the uncomfortable seats or squirm in wheelchairs as their bodies move to hidden impulses. They might watch the project more than absorb their ideas, finding their imaginations captured by an idea that takes them into another stream of consciousness. Or they may find that their personal relationship with the preacher affects their ability to listen to a sermon, a factor relating to whether trust has been developed or broken. A preacher's invitation to clap or into the manner of the deaf community wave and press both hands in the air, to lift arms or open their hands, to shout amen or God is good all the time, or repeat phrases over the course of the sermon can invite the physical involvement of the community of faith in ways that enhance or detract from reception of the word and collaboration with the preacher, whether through arts such as dance or through preaching. Crip bodies also defy erasure and instead invite collaboration between performers and audience, between performers of the word and people of the Christ community as they open themselves to receive and cooperate with both the preacher and the word. This collaboration involves participation in multiple dimensions through the senses, attitudes, and relationships.
Jesus' performance, beginning in the synagogue, proclaims and incarnates solidarity with created bodies and resistance to the powers of oppression and death. As divine performer, Jesus calls others to watch, to witness, and to collaborate. Jesus' proclamation and incarnation of his words invite Christians to embody this hope. Called to incarnate truth, to live as the Christ community, people are to join in Christ's liberating performance. One way of doing so is through the practice of preaching. Collaboration in preaching prepares disciples to incarnate the word in our lives.
From Judith Butler, who uses gender performance to disrupt the binary of hetero, homosexual disabilities. Scholar Petra Coopers also talk about the binary categories for people who are disabled, who are either unaware, able-bodied, or poor and crippled. Yet, disabled people in our living or performance of life generates truth about our bodies and our lives. Covers frames Crip life in general as a performance, which is the case whether or not we are conscious of this. Crip people may experience just induce spasms that affect our movements. Acutely aware of our bodies are performing under pressure. At other times, we may deliberately perform disability in response to systemic oppression. For instance, if we receive hours of care or other forms of needed support. Couples argues that the many skills developed in living as a Crip body are transferable to conscious performance. Quote, how to live artfully, how to move nimbly through discursive fields, tipping past stereotype, abducting the diagnostic, medical, and charitable goals. These are the kinds of guerrilla skills most disabled people learn in a disabling world. Art-based performance can pick up on these skills, enhance them, and use them to disseminate pride, critique, power, and the beauty of vulnerability, and to engage in improvisation on the edge of control. Unquote. Sometimes Crip bodies perform to disrupt ableism, and other times we perform to bring art and unanticipated beauty to the space. The combination of pushing as a performative art with the skills of a Crip performer enriches this incarnational perpetration, this warping ableism, embodying the goodness of creation and improvising when unexpected barriers arise. We know how disability challenges normalized ideals of the aesthetic. Describing a photograph of two women on a bridge in Paris, one without arm and one whose legs are covered in braces. Disabilities called the Rosemary Garland Thompson writes that such encounters, quote, work to broaden collective expectations of who can and should be seen in the public sphere and help create a richer and more diverse human community. In her work on the power and function of sharing, Garland Thompson explores an ocular reaction, the stare, to a sight that is unusual, where the one who looks is seeking to comprehend what is unanticipated. The stare can carry forward into engagement, she says. Once else at the center in that encounter between Sarah and Sherry is the encounter that sets in motion a relationship. Some tears may avert their eyes with disgust or anger, refusing to engage in relationship, but the encounter has already happened. Shock, wonder, making sense of something new as a child might do, and all other reactions it's might experience. As a Crip preacher, conscious of how Crip bodies challenge and disrupt norms, to allow and invite the chair of the congregation is risky and radical. But inviting the chair may make it possible for those participating in a collaborative performance of the preaching event to expand their imagination about human experience and the human condition. In this way, a sense of diversity and creative goodness of the divine proclaims a richer incarnational theology.
Performance invites the stare. In many ways, the gospel depicts Jesus, who invites the stare. When Jesus reads and fulfills the scripture from Isaiah, he attracts attention and harnesses its energy. Quote, "The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him," end quote. In that hometown encounter, the eyes carry suspicion and the crowd drives him away. In other gospel scenes, people call out to Jesus, wanting his stare and attention. They receive not only his stare, but that of the disciples and the onlookers. While onlookers may engage in a stare of pity or disgust, wanting to move away, Jesus engages in a look of compassion and mutuality, asking what people needed from him. His unwavering look communicates the desire to be in relationship with bodies rejected by others. After the crucifixion, Thomas refuses to believe unless he sees with his own eyes. The risen one invites not only his stare, but also his touch. The disabled God, the one who made heaven and earth, is also the one who is crucified and risen, still bearing the wounds. The disabled God invites the stare, and with that offers a relationship that leads to collaboration in ministry. The next one. People have been socialized to avoid or hide their stare from abnormal bodies. Crip writer Coffey comments, quote, "As an extension of Crip erasure and ableism, as an extension of non-disabled supremacy's restrictive hold on beauty, we have been taught to look away from physically disabled body minds," end quote. While staring may attempt to make sense of the unexpected, like the disabled body, there is a cost for those who are stared at. Eli Clare summarizes that the many ways Crip people have been seen. Quote, "Over the centuries in white Western culture, people now known as disabled have been monsters, gods, goddesses, and oracles. We have been proof of events that happened during our mother's pregnancies, demonstrations of sin, and markers of evil. We have been evolutionary missing links, charities, favorite objects, the proving ground for Christian miracles. We have been the wild and exotic girst of freak shows, test subjects for the Nazis as they built and refined their gas chambers. We are the burdens on society, useless eaters. We are tragedy and heroism. We are out of control, excessive, incapable. We are courage, metaphor, cautionary tale, downfall. We are better off dead. Some of these beliefs are long gone, others still current. They mitigate through the centuries, contradicting and bolstering each other. However, when performers invite the stare, the artist controls and transforms the terms of the encounter. Crip performers play with disability, showing its full complexity rather than offering themselves merely as objects of pity or as examples of super Crip triumph over adversity. Likewise, in performing Crip testimony, ministers frame disability beyond narratives of pity or triumph. The invitation to gaze is transgressive as it destabilizes stereotypes, disrupting who can and should be On stage, Crip performers call audiences to look at the ways our bodies move and the sounds of our voices make.
As performers in the world, perpetrators invite that chair, and like an artist, control and transform the term of that encounter. The disruptive power of the word claims the goodness of creation and resists all forces of sin that would limit, oppress, and even erase life. Paul writes of becoming, quote, a spectacle to the world, to angels and to mortals, end quote, and talking to those Corinthians who are rich as he invites them instead to imitate him. Power not found in wealth, but in God. After wheeling out to the center of the chancel, a Crip preacher leads the congregation in a time of prayer, inviting God to bless and appear in the words and thoughts of the whole Christ community. Looking up, the congregation is staring back. Preachers may prefer not to think about their bodies being on display, but even under our elves, Crip voices, Crip gates, and Crip devices. So through we invite the chair. Like Paul in some ways, a Crip preacher is willing to be that spectacle to help reorient Christ community's priorities. In doing so, they seek to invite the Christ community to collaborate in living the gospel and incarnating the word. One example of a Crip preacher who invites the chair is South African Anglican priest Father Michael Lapsley, who preached the closing sermon at the 10th Assembly at the World Council of Churches in Busan, Korea in 2013. During the apartheid struggle in South Africa, Lapsley opened a partial address to him, which is folded in his hands, destroying them, damaging his eardrum, and causing the loss of one eye. Eventually, his hands were replaced by metal hooks. At one point, as he preached to the assembly, he raised his hook's hand for all to see. In the sermon, he referenced an icon where Christ was depicted with one leg shorter than the other, as he reflected on the suffering servant in Isaiah 52 and 53 that depicted the Messiah as marked beyond human semblance, desired by no one. The quote.
Lapsley said, quote, "Many of us with dramatic physical disabilities have had our own experiences of people looking at us with a mixture of horror and pity and then turning away. In reality, those of us with the most visible disabilities, physical and mental, are icons for the whole human family. We illustrate dramatically what is true for all of us, that, quote, messed upness, brokenness, imperfection, and incompleteness is the human story. just as many of us cannot survive or manage without the compassion and helpfulness of other human beings, so it is true for all of us that we need one another to be fully human, end quote.
The chair invited by the Crip performance has the potential both to make people uncomfortable as they engage in forbidden behavior and to invite them to experience the incarnation in new ways that can transform relationship into ones based on respect. These sermons urge the assembly to listen to each other's pain, bind up wounds, seek reconciliation, and be led to justice and peace by the God of life. His willingness to share his story and his body in performing the word bore witness to the holiness of incarnated life, even when maimed by war, even under the threat of all that would destroy life. The tale of the I messed up. Sorry. This missing fear of pity for Crip bodies, the Crip worship reformer, like the gospel itself, quote, grants new ways of experiencing the known world. As the good preacher invites the chair, they collaborate in seeing themselves in new ways that celebrate all the gathered bodies, celebrate the grace of the incarnation, the joy of lapsly preaching at the WCC provides one example of the transformative power of the invitation for the gathered community to share, which further demonstrates what I propose in conjunction a quick practice of preaching and performing the word. Before I end today's performance, I want to also name briefly how we are encouraged to look away from peoples and situations that are experiencing the violence of war and genocide. The ongoing genocide in Gaza is one that I've sought to bear witness to since my solidarity visit there in 2009. I recommend highly Jazz Pierre's work on the right to maim. Just as Lapsley invited us to stare at his maimed body, we in the disability community need to stare, need to bear witness, need to develop practices of solidarity with peoples whose bodies are being maimed and tortured, whose minds are being traumatized. As far back as Nancy is and like the further back, disability theologians have denounced war militarization because of the detention work on bodies. The leading cause of death and maiming of children in 2024 was the state of Israel, according to the United Nations. Hospitals and rehabilitation centers are being destroyed on purpose. Access to travel out of Gaza for health care is almost non-existent. And so we as theologians, clergy, preachers, members of churches, Crip people need to share. Then we need to collaborate with Christ Liberating Lab to protect the incarnational goodness of beloved bodies. Protect by joining with people and the International Court of Justice to call on governments to impose sanctions, stop arms sales, boycott products, and partner with churches and faith communities in this cause. And I know many churches and faith communities are doing this. So, in conclusion, great preaching performances resist pressure and ableism that and incarnate the liberating word of God that claims solidarity with diverse bodies. The evocative invitation to share as the body of a Crip preacher transgresses social mores to truly be in solidarity with one another through Christ's incarnation. Thank you so much.
I'm going to move up the podium so I can, but thank you, Miriam, for that, for your talk. So I will open it up for Q&As. Oh, this is Greg was again. And we will alternate between taking questions in the room and online, and also in the room there are two mics on the side of the room. And anyone needs a mic? Well, so if you want to stand up, I might stand up on the that side of the room, which is that side. And then Shelly or Tammy will run around with a mic and just raise your hand. I think Shelly Shelly forgot her running shoes, but she can still run. So, yeah. Any questions?
Hi, Miriam. I'm Sam. Thank you so much for that performance, and really encouraged with your embodiment of what you're preaching. I've got a question. I think you started off, you're exploring preaching as one aspect of pastoral ministry. I wonder whether you've got anything to say in terms of cripping pastoral care as one of the calls of ministry.
Yeah, I think it's that's a whole nother chapter. So to briefly tell you, I look at pastoral care along with Miriam his work on access and mercy and I forget the name, a Canadian Crip author who writes about care webs. And I imagine how that collaboration in pastoral care can help Crip it within congregations. But we can talk more about that. But yeah, it's a good question.
Angela?
Yeah, we have a question online from Paul Coleman. He asks, he says, I've always shied away from viewing preaching as performance and often feel compelled to apologize for fidgeting or getting distracted while preaching. How do we overcome the expectations of churches to appear to be able, mind-bodied while preaching, especially when the criteria for, quote, good leadership actively discriminates against our mannerisms?
Yeah, exactly, Paul. And I think I do not have all the answers, obviously, but I think part of it is the difficulty. Some preachers shy away from thinking of their sermons as performance, even though it's a very old homiletical, but they see performance as somehow inauthentic. And that's not how I mean performance, and that's not how homileticians have meant performance. So just, I think, knowing that people are going to tell when we fidget and move, and trying to be okay with that in ourselves, trying to overcome all my internalized ability to be okay with my body will help ease the congregation, and also there may be time to open that into a wider conversation about incarnational theology and the significance of bodies in our faith.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Joelle Bruner, and I'm a student here at ILIF School of Theology. And my question goes to, it's sort of the theme of the conference. It's how many denominations, how many manifestations of practice are not inclusive, and how to sustain ourselves in places that are supposed to be generative, where we are supposed to be leading generative practice, but may not be fully appreciated or even welcome or understood. Sorry to hit you with that one.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good conversation, and there'll be wisdom shared throughout the week here. But in my denomination, it's just keeping up, keeping grounded in my faith and what I feel called to do, and then finding people who recognize that in me and who can help figure out the system and the factors that need to change. And that doesn't happen overnight, as we all know, but to gather with other Crip leaders like here who can offer that solidarity in that struggle.
Angela, anything online? Any questions in the room?
Great talk again, for sure. I was fascinated by your use of the word icon. And in some of the stuff I've written and read and learned over time and tried to figure out how we help people avoid seeing people as the super Crip and the model or something. But you can say that. I mean, what's her name can say that in the wonderful TED Talk. Stella Young can say that in the wonderful TED Talk, but she can't prevent me from projecting onto you whatever I want.
No.
And so the question, I think icon is a really interesting term. I'd like you to say more about that.
Yeah, I think it will. When I was reading it just now, I thought, oh, no, why did I include that word? And then I read it. But I think it came because Michael Lapps, he referred to it in his sermon, so connected to that. I also very much critique the super Crip image, and I think that's to be well critique. But I also am training myself for aiming not to always comply with compulsively able-bodied or able-minded norms. So I kind of mingle in the middle somewhat uncomfortably and hope that recognize that I can't control what people put onto my body, but hope that through engagement that becomes deeper and more profound, as I would hope for any quote unquote diverse or marginalized body.
Hi, Miriam. This is Becca Anderson. Thank you so much for this. There's so much in here, and I'm definitely going to go back and reread and think more. I was really struck what you were talking about earlier in your talk about pulpits and the ways that they conceal bodies and the kind of able-bodied and heteronormative and all the other things that they are perpetuating. And you may have touched on this and I missed it, so my apologies. But I was thinking about how when I was first starting to preach, I had a very instinctive desire to not preach from a pulpit. And my disabilities don't prevent me from preaching in most pulpits, so it was very much a choice that I was making. And I had these conversations with mentors of mine who were not Crips, were not disabled, but they were queer women. And a lot of them told me, no, when you have the option to preach in a pulpit, you preach from a pulpit because that's queering the sense of what a pulpit is when you have a body that is not expected to be in a pulpit in the pulpit.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I was just wondering, like, what your thoughts are on, is that just trying to use the master's tools to tear down the master's house, or is there something there to do with that?
Well, I think it could be, but I think it goes back to that representation piece, like whose bodies have been prevented from standing in that pulpit. It can be very profound to say, no, my body should be here, my body, God, I believe God desires my body should be here, but not to like, I think we need to think of what pulpits hide in our bodies, or may hide, or may make the congregation more comfortable. But okay, I know who the preacher is standing in the pulpit. They're the authority. So I think I wouldn't say don't do that, but I would say let's reflect on why we're making this decision and what that is communicating to people in the congregation and to like even people in the congregation who may not have that ability.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I just want to vocalize the gratitude that's being shared in the chat. Chris says, I can't help but think how much of speech and preaching classes have focused on not being distracting.
Yeah.
And Paul says that he is doing an assessed preach this weekend for seminary and is now feeling inspired to be more deliberate in his performance. So thank you so much for your talk today.
Thank you.